In this lesson, we're going to talk about levels and crop regions specifically. Just a kind of a nice little mini lesson. I'm going to start here with my Revit structure template file from my recent files window, just to start with the basic project. And I have already dabbled a little bit with this in earlier lessons, but I thought I would do this maybe even as an isolated lesson for anyone else who's just kind of tuning in. So we're talking about levels and crop regions and when they intersect and how they behave. So you can't see a level from a floor plan. So we either have to go to an elevation or a section. I'm going to draw a couple more levels just for the fun of it up here on the architecture tab under the datum panel. I'll pick grids, and I can pick existing objects. Always look up over here. Always check your options bar. Look over here, and of course it says make new plan view, which means it's going to make a new floor plan. And you can even specify what type is it. It's going to make a ceiling plan and a floor plan and a structural plan. So it's going to make all three. You can say just a structural plan if you want, or just a floor plan or whatever. So let's do that. Let's say we only want a structural plan. It's going to put it in here, and that will happen once we make our level. So we say, okay, here's another level, and I'm lining them up quite nicely. We did that in earlier lessons. Escape, escape. So I have a couple levels in there. I'm going to zoom out with my middle wheel button. Now I'm going to turn on my crop region. I pick down here, it turns on that crop region. Well, I just have used Revit long enough. I kind of instinctively know how long these can be, but you never know how zoomed in you are, however this works. So we've talked in the past about the 3D versus 2D. So when you go in here, I'm going to turn off the bubbles on the end to make it easier to maneuver these guys. Okay, so it's not so busy. And click out. So now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, pan over. So once again, we've talked about the crop region. That is the crop region. You can turn the crop region visibly on or off. Okay, and you can make it so that it crops or doesn't crop with this tool, cropping and no cropping. Okay, so what we're talking about here is you'll notice that as we move this guy out, okay, this way, it's going to show that level. And if we click on the level, it's going to show 3D at the ends in this particular case. Okay, we know that if you can click on here, you can change this to say 2D, changes the button, and then you can kind of pull this and you can pull it beyond the crop region. Okay, because the 2D button isn't going to crop the same way. If you pick on here and you drag the 3D button, what happens is, and it's aligning, I'll unalign that, is once it crosses that cropping point, it turns to 2D because the 3D point gets kind of clipped back in here. Actually, I shouldn't say that. The 3D point will follow wherever your mouse goes. Okay, the 2D will actually, because it's cropping, okay, it'll kind of instinctively crop that over there. Watch, I'm going to do that again. Right click on here, and I'm going to say maximize 3D extents, and then click out, and then I'm going to bring this guy back. Okay, now if I pick on here, bing, put it back in there. Now watch, I'm going to grab this. It's the 3D point, which means that if I look from the north elevation, it's going to be moving that same point. It'll be on this side. So again, as I cross this, now right now this is cropping, right? If I go like this, it is cropping. Okay, so that's fine. As I drag this 3D point out, what happens is the 3D point actually will continue, and it kind of leaves the 2D point getting kind of trimmed back there. Okay, what's this guy doing? Okay, the 3D point is over there. Let's drag this guy back, move it back into there, unalign it, do the same thing. Pick on here. I'm trying to explain a little bit about the behavior as your level lines interact with the edges of your crop region. Okay, goes out. Now that's 2D only because I dragged this out. If I drag this back, it'll come back where it was. Okay, as opposed to if I take this guy and actually turn the 2D off and pick on here and drag this out, Okay, the 3D point is still back here. If I drag that 3D point out and bring the 2D point back in here, these are not really talking. Okay, if I drag this, because I separated them manually. Okay, the only way this is going to come back is if I right click and I say reset to 3D extents, and then it'll do that. And it also adds that in there. And we did talk about the difference between these two guys in our last couple lessons. You might have a review of that. So once again, there's a little, first of all, this is, if the clipping is on, it'll clip it. And what it does is it always leaves a little bit of overhang is what it does. Okay? Leaves a little extra in there. And that way when you turn off the crop region, you end up with a little bit extra in there. Okay? If you don't crop it, it just basically doesn't crop it like anything else. Okay? But as you drag this guy out, it'll start to pull these guys out. Okay? And eventually, once it exceeds the 3D point, it will stop extending it. Panning over. Okay? Finally, this one is there. Now, if I pick on here, it's going to say that's where the 3D point is. Okay? Once again, if I drag the 3D point across the border of my crop region, it'll clip it, it'll leave the 2D point back there, and then it'll drag the 3D point out. Okay? That's not the same as picking on here and making this 2D, dragging the 2D point to there and dragging the 3D point out to there. Okay, this one has the 3D point out there and this says 2D. This one has the 3D point out there and it says 2D. But this guy is actually still communicating, because the only reason why it did that was because I pulled it out. Okay, again, picking on here, bring this guy back, not doing anything. I need to right click and say, oh, right click and say, now reset to 3D extents. Let's bring this guy back in. So that's not available, and I'm trying to think of the reason why. I think you just have to just pop that in there like that. And it's now aligning them. You don't have to align them. So it's worth doing exactly what I'm doing in here, testing it with this by dragging this crop region out and back, and then watching the behavior. Notice this guy isn't doing anything. That tells me that that's set to be 2D. There's the 3D point way over there. Okay, drag it back, drag that 3D point back. Sometimes you have to drag the 3D point to the 2D point or vice versa. Okay, so your crop region on any elevation, let's go to west elevation, same thing. Let's see where the crop region is. There it is. Okay. As soon as you turn it on, by the way, it enables the clipping. And as I move this guy down, okay, these guys are going to kind of follow it. And then I can just turn this off. Okay. The reason why they're following it is because they're set to be 3D. Which is these points here. Notice it's aligning them. So if I take this guy and I go to here, it's going to keep going. If I go past that point, that's the 3D point of this guy. So when your crop region is going to clip the 3D and leave the 2D. If you just let them do their thing, they'll just follow it, follow it, follow it. Okay, until they've exceeded their 3D extents. Or you can pick on here and take the 3D off and then manually pull your 2D point, leave your 3D point there as you please. Okay, these guys are still aligned. Click out, right click. The reset to 3D extents isn't giving, so I think could be something to do with the cropping. So I can just manually bring that guy back. So hopefully that clears up a few things. We've talked about the visibility of the crop region. I'm not going to do that here again. We've talked about what the cropping does. We've talked about right-clicking on here and taking a level and resetting it to 3D extents and maximizing 3D extents. And then we've talked about how we can turn the symbol on and off and how we can use our split. how our floor plans are named after our levels, and how if we try to rename the level, it tries to rename the floor plan. And once you create a level, you should check over here and see what type of floor plan you're making. Okay, if you make a level that doesn't have a plan, the circle will be black, and then you will have to go in and use your View tab and say make a new floor plan inside of here, and then select that level to make your floor plan. So we will continue to talk about levels as we move along here because they're so relative to everything. But that last 4, 5, 6 lessons on levels and crop regions should definitely get you up and running. Once again, feel free to go to the CAD Clips webpage and do a search for level or crop region. And I believe we'll move into our next topic, which are grid lines, very similar to level lines.